I started using Notion before databases were a thing, so I've used it in the past. I actually built this channel off of Notion tutorials. I think the first one was posted in 2020, and then about a year later I switched to Obsidian, which is the app I'm currently using. However, I wanted to revisit Notion to see, 1, can I replace what I'm doing in Obsidian with Notion? 2, where has Notion come since I've stopped using it? And 3, why I'm actually using Notion now for some things but leaving Obsidian to other personal work. So inside Notion, I'm inside the Notion app in a dark theme because I use the dark theme on Obsidian, so it just makes sense to use dark in here. I have another tab up, a database example. It's just an example to go through later on. And then I have all of the points that I want to make here. So when it comes to the writing experience, having used Obsidian for almost 3 years now, the Markdown is similar. They both use hashes and dashes and numbers, etc. to create different things inside of each app. However, as you can see over here, in Notion there's only 3 levels of heading, whereas in Obsidian there's 6, and I personally use a lot of headers in long files, so that's a little bit of an irritation. But Notion, because of the way it's built, has access to columns. In Obsidian, you have to do a load of codey stuff to make columns. But what I've actually found going back to Notion is columns annoy me. I don't actually like writing in columns because to me, it just clutters my view and I can't work out where I want to be looking when I'm writing. When I just have documents that I want to see lots of information, columns are helpful. And to me, I think this relates to the blocks inside of Notion. So for those unfamiliar, you can turn the block into any of these options, which is in the / command. So if I come into here, push the /, it gives me all of those block options. You have the same inside of Obsidian, but blocks in Obsidian, you can move up and down just like you would in Notion, but you can't just drag them and move them into a column, which is what this is. But it means when you want to highlight words, I can't highlight like this bullet point because it thinks that it's these words that I want to highlight. I just want to highlight the line, and it, for me, is a little bit confusing now. But the main frustration I have with these blocks and the highlighting, I don't know whether this is block specific or writing specific, but in Obsidian, if I push speech marks, it then highlights the word and puts speech marks around them. This just deletes the word, which is really irritating, and I've done this multiple times in other applications. What I want to do is put speech marks there, and then I have to come back here and then speech marks there. In Obsidian, I can just highlight the words and then go speech marks, but it deletes it. I think that's block related. If not, then correct me in the comments. The moving of blocks up and down is with hotkeys. I don't like the fact that when I move them up and down, it indents inside of bullets, but again, I think that's just a personal preference thing. The width can be wide or narrow, just like in Obsidian, but with Notion, this is page specific, so if I go full width, this page is full width, not all of them, whereas Obsidian, it's global, so every page is either full width or not, unless you add CSS, which most people don't want to do, so that's I guess a plus, even though it's not really a fair comparison. Colors is an interesting one because Notion, even though it's far easier to add colors to the background and add colors to the text, you're limited with the colors you can use because you can only use the colors Notion gives you. Obsidian, it's harder to do, but when you know how to do it with HTML, you get literally every color available. So for starters, Notion is easier, but if you want to go further, Obsidian is more customizable. And that's the same with the hotkeys. Notion, to start with, there are nice hotkeys that you can use to get places quickly, but inside of Obsidian there are custom hotkeys, and when you want to change the hotkey because you've got apps that do similar things, or you want to alter a hotkey because another app, so I use something called Morgan, which I use as my calendar app, you can see here, and that's got a global hotkey, and sometimes the hotkeys in Morgan conflict with Notion, or conflict with Obsidian, or whatever app I use, so I want to be able to change the hotkeys, and Notion you can't do that, Obsidian you can, and Obsidian has far more hotkeys because there are commands there, so again, to start with, Notion hotkeys, really nice, but when you want to go that little bit further, that little bit more customization, that's where I find Obsidian being more useful. Coming back into Notion, this might be because I'm not that used to it, because I've only been using it again for the last 3 or 4 weeks, but this /, when you type /, it brings up the / commands all the time. Obsidian, you can turn that off. And it's annoying when I want to write a / and I am typing and then / and then it brings this up. Like, I don't want to see that. Yeah, small things. But when it comes to the line highlighting, when I'm writing lots and lots of text, if I leave, for example, my cursor in the middle of words and I'm looking elsewhere, I'm off on another screen, finding where the cursor is again, it's kind of a pain because you have to actually look for the blinking thing. So I found myself scrolling up and down in long lines of text. And quickly, when I show you Obsidian, you can see here, I've got this highlighted line and I can add it so I know exactly where my cursor is, irrespective of how many words I've got inside the file. Which I think is another one of those small nuanced features that if you want customization, Obsidian helps you with that, Notion doesn't. But of course, all of this depends on what you're actually using the apps for, and I use my note-taking app, my writing app for writing. And this is obviously block related, but for whatever reason, I can't find a hotkey to just delete a block. I have to click and then delete, or I have to like highlight all the words and then backspace or delete. I can't just hotkey delete. And when I'm writing lots and lots and lots of lines inside of Notion, every line of text is a block. And I want to quickly delete it sometimes, but I can't. And whereas Obsidian is just Control-D, or that's what I use anyway. Then for the page preview, because I link a lot of ideas together, whether they're sources or research or projects, if I hover over this, I can't see what's in the page. If I click it, I open up the page, but now I can't see what was in this page. So when I control click, it brings it up in a tab, and I can't snap it to the side or anything. I can't look at the things at the same time unless I alt click, but when I alt click, it doesn't seem to do anything. So I have to right click and then open in the side, which, yeah, I mean, it's okay. It's just a little bit annoying. And then when I'm in here, it closes down when I click out, and I'm like, no, I want it to stay there. Whereas in Obsidian, just as a quick demonstration, this is a link, and it shows me the link, and if I want to go again, I can go down as many times as I want without having to move anywhere or anything like that, and then type whatever it is. And if I want to bring it up in the side panel, I can, and I can just go backwards and forwards between the two, which makes the writing experience so much more fluid for me. And then moving down to the experience, Notion is fast most of the time. Sometimes I don't really know why, it just slows down, whether it's buffering to sync to the cloud, or, I mean, loading databases is a whole other situation, but I don't know, there's just small blips. And with Obsidian being local, I don't experience any blips at all. However, because Notion is an online application, this is the app, but obviously you can use it on a browser or whatever search engine, you can have it access on multiple devices, which is great. Obsidian you can, but it's paid, or you need some tech-savvy cloud service use. So this actually makes it easier to collaborate with other people, which is exactly what I'm using Notion for. So the multiple device experience is simpler and easier with Notion if you've got people that are not familiar with tools like Obsidian and other cloud services. Moving on to AI, I can't speak much about this because I don't use it. I don't find AI useful in any sense when it comes to writing, apart from when I'm searching for something, in which case I use Bing AI. I don't like Notion's AI, I don't like any ChatGPT or anything like that for writing because it either oversimplifies, adds redundant words, or doesn't actually talk about what I'm researching, because the research I'm looking at is academics, and for whatever reason, I would imagine it's because AI is looking at the popular stuff that's put online, it doesn't seem to go in depth with the academic research I'm looking at, which it doesn't help me. So Obsidian and Notion both have AI, Notion's is easier to access, but that's as much as I can say. The tabs and windows in Notion works fine. The tab loading is a little bit slow when you want to open up a new tab. You can see it's loading and then it's there and then you can click on it. It's a little bit slow in comparison to Obsidian. There you go again, it's a little bit slow when changing the tab. So Obsidian's faster, I think, because it's local, but it works and you can have multiple windows. It's not as intuitive as Obsidian, but that's probably because I use Obsidian. However, not having split screens or proper split screens is the biggest frustration I have when writing in Notion. As a very quick example in Obsidian, if I'm writing something, I could have a couple of tabs up here for what I'm writing, the project. I can have a source file down the bottom for when I'm looking at the sources. Then on the right side, I can have actual information that maybe I want to use. Maybe it's another source, maybe it's another piece of research, maybe it's further research or an older project. Then I can have a canvas, which, I mean, Notion doesn't have a canvas at all. You have to import another application. But inside of Obsidian, I'll then have a canvas for mind mapping ideas out whilst I'm trying to write. So I can see all of this at once, obviously, on multiple screens as well. But in Notion you get this, and then you can have another version of this on another window, but that's it. I'm going to emphasize again, this is me, my preferences. I am biased towards Obsidian because I use Obsidian, but another point that I want to make is workspace saving. So when I'm inside of Notion, I've got 2 tabs up. I can't save the 2 tabs, or maybe I've got 7 tabs. I can't save the tabs to my knowledge, and this sidebar is that. There's no way to change the sidebar. You have shared, private, and then the favorite pages, you can see I've got a couple of pages in there, the settings, and that's it. There's nothing else inside of the viewer, the workspace to save. Whereas in Obsidian, because there is far more customization, this is a button, so I can push the button there, and I can save as many buttons on this side as I want, maybe lots, maybe none, and if I go to temp, I can then load another workspace. So I have a different layout of the sidebar, different layout of the sidebar, different pages up, and you can see I've got another button there. It's a different button, and I can save workspaces. So if I'm writing, or if I'm doing food, or if I'm just wanting for an overview or a review, I can save a workspace so I don't have to bring it up all the time. And the closest thing Notion has to this, I think, is just a favorites page. So a page that's a dashboard page, which is fine, it works, it's just not as customizable, which I personally like. And speaking about customizations, quick add and commander buttons inside of Obsidian, there's no way to replicate that inside of here from what I've seen. You can add a page in a database, but then you're limited to the information in that database. So there was always a question of what database does this go in? Does it go in the task database, the project database, the inbox database, the notes database? What information needs to go on it? And then you'd need to select the template you want to use. You can probably set up automations for that, but in Obsidian, you can do that straight away. And because every file is just a normal file, it's not constrained to what the database properties are, you can add things and combine things together, which we'll go on a little bit later on. But the quick add is also related to a hotkey, so I don't need to use my mouse inside of Obsidian when I want to add a new file. I can go Control N and then type something, whereas in Notion, I don't know how I would add a new project or a new idea or a new source from this view. I think I would need to go to the database and then push the add button, either in the new or in whatever view you're in, the calendar, etc. I'd need to find a database or find a place to add a button to add a new note, or go into the line, go bracket bracket plus or at whatever symbol, and then add a new subpage here, but then you'd need to go to the database to sort out the properties, which I don't want to do, and I don't want to have to manage all those template stuff. I just want to go like this, go Control N, I'm going to add a research file, type the name, and then enter, and it's done. If you know how to do that in Notion, let me know in the comment section below, because like I say, I haven't used this app in like 3 years. Backlinks. I remember when they brought backlinks into Notion. You can see I've got some backlink examples in here. If I click on the page, it'll open up the page, and yay, we've got the page in here, empty page. But what I'm struggling with is that there's no backlink here. I'm in the example page, and there is a link in the overview page. You can see it's in the breadcrumb, but I can't see the backlinks inside of this page. However, if I link the example database page, then go to that page, now you can see the backlinks. So the page has to be in a database for you to see the backlinks, which to me just seems really limiting. This can also then clutter up the view, especially if you've got a long name to the file, and I don't know of any way to add an alias. And by alias, I mean we've got the file here. If I go to the other side of the brackets, make a pipe symbol, which is just a line down, and then say example, now it's changed the name of the page to example. So if I have 2 different points in a sentence and I want to change the name of it, instead of revisiting Notion, maybe I have Notion and then revisiting at 2 different points, I can change that, I can customize that, which isn't available in Notion to my knowledge. And all of this becomes helpful when you're writing in research and you want to reference a source, or you want to put a footnote in somewhere. And it's easier for me to put a backlink in the text than it is to go all the way up to the top of the page and put a relation in a database, or put an inline database inside the written text, because now I have a database where all my words should be. And this is certainly not an Obsidian tutorial, but inside of the backlinks panel, if I click on search and say, let's say Gibson, because I know that's a person that's done some research here, it then filters the backlinks for the pages that has Gibson in it. So if I control click, it brings up this one, so control F, Gibson, there's James Gibson, the guy that was talking about ecological psychology. So I can filter the backlinks for words that are inside those specific files, which again, you can't do that in Notion's backlinks, it just shows you the page. I do recognise this coming off as a bit of a rant, but I'm just sharing my thoughts. Then we've got the outline, and yes, there's a table of contents block, but if I have the table of contents here, and I go down to other, and the page is actually longer, when I'm down here, I can't now click on the heading again, I have to go back to the table of content, so I would need a link here to go back to the table of contents to go up, or I would need a table of contents at every header, which to me just seems convoluted. In Obsidian, it's just in the right sidebar, or move it wherever you want because you can customize it. So let's just put that there. Let's close those down for a second. So we've got the outline down there. As I scroll down, I can click on that one and jump around the file. I don't have to make a table of contents thing. Again, it's one of those small things that makes writing far easier. Leading us to databases. Now, databases in Notion are fairly easy and intuitive. That's my personal experience from it. And there are lots of views. You've got the table view, which I mainly see as calculations. The list view is essentially the table view, just looks a little different as condensed. So I never really used the table view because I didn't like the calculations. If I was going to do those, I'd use those in Excel. So I use the list view. The gallery view is more an aesthetic thing. I'm not too fussed about having an image on a link. I just want to be able to go to the page for the information, the writing. But I recognize other people like aesthetics, so cool view. Now with the calendar view, I use the calendar view a lot when I was using Notion for tasks and projects, but it's not a calendar app. Google Calendar is far better than Notion at being a calendar app because Notion's not a calendar app. So what I'm actually doing is using Morgan, a calendar app with tasks and events and scheduling links and all that sort of stuff for calendaring, which means I don't see a use for the calendar database view unless you're doing tasks and projects in Notion, which means you'd need to be collaborating with other people and they would want to see your tasks, which again is a very niche use case that I don't personally have right now. And I've actually found that doing the time blocking, the task management, the project management and stuff inside of the calendar for an overview is far easier than Notion. It's when you get to granular task setting that you need something like Notion, which is what I'm using it for. Not the overview or time blocking or project management, it's the granular task management that Notion's helping me out with. And I feel the Kanban is either a love it or hate it because you either use it or you don't, and I'm one of those that just doesn't. But Notion has these in every single database, so it's flexible, it's easy, it's intuitive, and it's really useful for collaborative work. However, there is a load delay. There is a delay when you load up databases. It's small, but as databases get bigger, as you add properties, it slows down. And I'm going to move this one up, so, oh wow, I'm going to talk about it now. There we go. Talk about it now. So the line limit, the amount of lines you can see inside of a database, it's limited, as you can see, to 100 pages. So this is an inline database and you can limit it to 100 pages, whereas in Obsidian it's just a continuous stream. You can have a continuous stream, but it's got to be a database page, which means you can't type anything underneath the page. So if, for example, my use case, I'm using this for collaborative scripts, if this is a line of the script that's a task that I want to get done, I can't use the database page because then I can't write anything underneath the database. So I need to load it 100 and then scroll down to load the next 100, which it's a small frustration point. But that's using the Obsidian database for more of a table purpose rather than a database purpose. If you're using Notion databases as more of a database, maybe like a project database, you're limited with the templates. And when I say limited, I'm going to give a quick example. So if I've got a video project, an essay project, and an article project, they're going to have different stages. So a video is obviously going to need to be recorded, whereas an essay won't need to be recorded. So there's a different status, whereas the priorities may be the same, which means inside of the database, I would need a status for video, a status for essay, and a status for article, a status property for each of those, which means 3 properties. If I have more than these 3 types of projects that have statuses, I think I have about 9 in Obsidian. I need 9 properties just for the statuses alone. If I then have other properties that are specific to that, well, now I need even more properties, which means you've got 30, 40, even more properties inside of a database. Is that an issue? Potentially. Is it annoying? I think so. If I was to have an article project database, an essay project database, a video project database, well, now the priority, i.e. high, medium, and low, would be a copied property. It would be a duplicate property in each of those databases, which again seems somewhat redundant. It seems like a hacky workaround to get something to work. And that relates to the point down here about duplicate properties. You would need either duplicate properties or you'd need a duplicate database that does mostly the same thing, but not quite the same thing. And you have a similar issue when it comes to writing scripts with databases because you're going to have a script per video inside of a database, which means you have a database per video that's going to have the same properties. So when it comes to relating databases or relating properties, you might have the same name for the same property over and over and over, which again is a frustration that I'm coming up with at the moment. Or I have one master script database that has thousands and thousands and thousands of pages because it's just a line per page, which doesn't seem smart because then I'd need to filter out everything and sort things. It just becomes a bit of a hassle. Obsidian manages all of that through metadata menu, so you can see this status is related to the video and the project is class and priority. So I can have a priority which is consistent across all of my projects, but if it's a video type of project then it has this status and this channel, whereas a different type of project will have a different status. Yes, these are nuanced frustrations, but these are the frustrations that I have going from Obsidian back to Notion for some collaborative use. Something I didn't mention, which I should have mentioned, Notion has bi-directional relations, which Obsidian doesn't do well. Obsidian is just you link from one page to another or one file to another, whereas Notion, inside of the databases, you can have those bi-directional links automatically created. So if I relate this to another page, it will show in the other page that it's related. Obsidian does that, but it doesn't do it in properties. So you can see I've got this page linked. If I come in here, it will show up inside this list. So this is automated. So the bidirectional links are automated, but it comes up inside of the backlinks panel, which is either down the bottom of the file or inside of the core plugin, which isn't as easy to find as Notion relation properties. And if you want to use the properties inside of Obsidian like you would in Notion, then that's where the limitation comes, because the property would show the outgoing link, but not the backlink. The backlink would be in this panel, so you'd have to go between the two different views. Some other quick things just to mention. So Notion is far easier when you're sharing and collaborating with other people, especially other people that don't have the app you're using, i.e. if they don't use Notion, you can still send them a Notion page and then see it, whereas Obsidian, it's much harder to do that, which is exactly why I'm using Notion, for collaborative purposes. The commenting inside of Notion, again, is far easier than it is Obsidian, which is why I'm using Notion for collaborative purposes. The user experience, so UX, is simpler in Notion, which is an advantage in some senses, but also a disadvantage when it comes to my personal use for research. And then the free syncing is a bonus for a lot of people. For me, I pay for Obsidian for the sync, and it works just as well as Notion. Having used Notion over the last 3 weeks, the cloud logging in and logging out is so annoying when it logs me out. I'm like, I just want to use the thing. Offline is just a no. Using Notion offline is just not useful. Whereas Obsidian can always be offline because it's a local app. The Notion export is cluttered, so if you do need to move elsewhere, good luck configuring those files. This is not fun. Whereas Obsidian's all Markdown, so you don't really have to do anything else, and you can use Markdown files, so Obsidian files, in other apps. The Notion mobile experience is limited. The Obsidian mobile experience is far better from my experience. You have the side panels in Obsidian mobile. You have a toolbar down the bottom with the hotkeys and shortcuts. All that stuff's there. You have tabs, whereas Notion is just a fancy website you can edit. That sounds really harsh, but that's how I feel. I mentioned this earlier, but Notion doesn't have a canvas at all. You'd have to embed some other tool, like Whimsical or something else inside of Notion, or Miro, just to get a canvas-type mind map view, whereas Obsidian does it already. I'll link a video at the top right for some ways that I use the Obsidian canvas, but I think it's amazing to have it inside of the tool. As a researcher, I work with a lot of PDFs, a lot of articles that I've exported as PDFs and files and videos and podcasts and blogs, and I use Zotero for that because Zotero is just better at referencing, because that's what it is a reference managing tool, and PDFs work really well, and I can import the highlights automatically into Obsidian and it links back to Zotero. Whereas in Notion, if I highlight things inside of a PDF, I can't link to the highlight in Notion to my knowledge, and I can't extract highlights from Zotero to Notion and have them link backwards and forwards. It just, from my experience, it doesn't work, and because I use Zotero all the time, it makes more sense for me to use Obsidian, which does link. Then when it comes to search, the Notion search and Obsidian search are essentially the same sorts of things. However, Notion has Quick Switcher and a community plugin which lets you just search for headings. In this search, I cannot find a way to search for just headings. It gives me everything, which I actually find slows down the search when I'm looking for just a file or just a heading, because it searches literally everything all of the time, which again is one of those small gripes I have with the search in Notion compared to Obsidian, because Obsidian splits these. You can either search everything or be more specific and look for a file or a heading or something else. From what I can see, Notion hasn't really fundamentally changed that much from when I left it 2 or 3 years ago, apart from adding in AI and automations, which I don't personally use, and the writing experience is very similar, a little bit clunky in places. I definitely cannot / will not move back to Notion for my research, my personal work, because Obsidian is faster, more customizable, and has options and features that I rely on now, the canvas being one example of that, which Notion just doesn't have at all. But because Notion's databases work far better as tables than any sort of table you can get in Obsidian, and it's easier to collaborate, that's what I'm using Notion for me, for my workflow. But it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on how you're using Notion or using Obsidian, or the comparison between the two that you would have. Obsidian certainly has a bigger learning curve when you want to go into advanced features when compared to Notion, but the ceiling is much higher.